So I'm reading from my book, which is called Skies Die Starless. It's published by Punk Dust Poetry, and this is a poem called Leave Alone. Words now plastic, disposable, degrading, Moog drone strikes dancing, in and out of sinkholes, foam picked, flicked from leather booths, ripped guts turned up, years of sleazed abuse, swollen ashtrays, empty bottles, pathetic jealousy, stares right through, stop. Leave alone. Somewhere monastic, onanistic, unsteady camera, overexposed, stumble home falling into piss-soaked doorways, glass-glinting pavements, for navigation, desperation, lens, shake, don't taste the bitumen, key in the door, too gone to get it up, even for yourself, too far gone to get it up, even for myself, wow and flutter, baby, I wow and flutter. Always written. I know it's a bit of a cliche amongst writers, but I've always written since I was a kid, writing comics, writing reports of football matches that I went to, writing about music. In fact, my parents found a book called Jamie's Book of Poetry, which contains some very, very bad primary school poems. And they sent it down to me quite recently. And yeah, I didn't know that existed, but from about the age of 16 was when I started to write seriously. I was really into bands like the Manic Street Preachers and Public Enemy, Credits to the Nation, and was writing lyrics. I got a guitar. I learnt the first chords to the first songs that we wrote, and I carried on writing those lyrics. Around 18 at A-level, I discovered Philip Larkin, who obviously has his problematic moments these days, but was a real big influence on me. High Windows especially was huge, and then moving to Swansea, Dylan Thomas is obviously etched all over the city, and my first trip to Cardiff, I remember picking up books by Patrick Jones and Lloyd Robson. They were some of the first exposures I had to modern poetry, and I was just really into it. But again, I was just writing songs in bands, trying to write that perfect pop song on the back of an envelope. Never quite managed it. At the age of about 30, I started at the Open University and did a degree in literature because I was bored and I liked reading books. And I thought I'd take the creative writing module because it seemed to be like an easy subject. How I was mistaken. But I did meet a wonderful, wonderful professor there called Wayne Thomas, who really took me under his wing and said, you know what, kid, you can write. And he suggested that I go on, and I went to do a master's in Cardiff, where I was lucky enough to study under Richard Gwynne, and from a poetry perspective learnt a lot from the likes of Claire Potter and John Freeman and Gwyneth Lewis. However, I was more into writing short stories at the time, and desperately trying to write the great American novel, which as a former English boy living in South Wales was a bit special. And that was it really. As a result of getting a master's degree, I got a decent job and stopped writing. Life and family, that work, it all gets in the way. And it wasn't until I got quite seriously ill that I picked up writing again. I finally found that I had something to write about. I did some online courses with Arvon. I think I learnt from Chrissy Williams and Daniel Sluman. And then I had a really eye-opening session with Natalie Ann Holbrow, who then properly, again, another person who's kindly enough taken me under their wing and was like, you can actually write poems, And so I started sending them off, just to see if anyone was interested in them. And yeah, surprisingly they were for me. I ended up, sorry, got really itchy nose, I'm so sorry. I ended up submitting to the Hippocrates Prize for Poetry and Medicine, and was shortlisted for that, and that was just an incredible achievement. My poem was commended, and that was when I really started taking stuff seriously. I was sending poems to Poetry Wales and got some amazing rejection letters from them before they finally published me, and I've written my first book, Rebel Blood Cells, which was all about my experience with cancer, and that was a really important book for me to put together. But once I'd written that, I carried on writing about the things that were affecting me. I had a compromised immune system, so I was really affected by COVID and lockdowns and not being able to get out. So I wrote a lot about that. I wrote a lot about socio-political issues, really, and a lot about my teenage years. And those poems about the 1990s really started to fall together and became this pamphlet, which is about far more than just 90s nostalgia. In fact, it's the opposite of 90s nostalgia, but those poems all fit really well together. And in fact, in the book, there's a whole bunch of poems and little pictures and things like that, which are all just directly taken from my notebooks from those days, which kindly my wife has never made me throw out. So, I've got these notebooks full of stuff of my early writing, which have made its way into my latest book. Swansea Sound. Torrents of rain, of abuse, 3 years of ugly meteorology, metaphorical. It was either cloud or night, never day, never awake. Smoking wet cigarettes, hurting, writing letters unaddressed. Even the good evenings, when I had a chance, the house flooded while I froze, and my clothes were soaked. She called for a cab. Apart from that one day, I was awake. We climbed out of his kitchen window, onto the flat roof of the extension, sunglasses, plastic cider bottles, played some tapes, 13 by Blur, Tender, another love song, Waiting for That Feeling, another heroin song. The flasher across the road kept his curtains shut. The warmth of the roof filled my body with endorphins, with amphetamines, with enough to make it through a little longer. Back at my flat, alone. He's got other people. Watch lights flicker over the sea, Stalingrad grey. I never shut my curtains. No one can see in. I listen to American Thighs, Hurt. I can't sleep until it's too late. I won't see her again until it doesn't matter. So I've always written from the perspective of someone who is ill. I've had depression and really quite serious anxiety issues since I was 13, chronic pain as well in my 20s. But acute leukemia, which is what I was diagnosed with in 2019, was far much more significant. This was life-threatening. This was a lack of consciousness at many points, a lack of being able to understand what was going on. And what that illness gave me was this set of vignettes and set of moments, like when I was waiting to be admitted to hospital, or when I was in the shower in hospital and trying to balance having, a needle in my hand and still, having a shower. It was really, really difficult, and not necessarily understanding at what point anything had happened. So I was writing down my journey, writing down my experiences, and in doing so found myself editing when I was asking my wife what had actually happened, or just making them more interesting to read, making them more memorable. And all of those creative writing instincts I'd had from writing short stories kicked in at that point. I was trying to make something that would last as a proper memory. And the acuteness of them as well, the acuteness of the illness, the quickness, the speed, it didn't fit that kind of long form piece. It fitted really short poems. So that's what I wrote. I then had PTSD from my treatment, which was again, really quite difficult to cope with. And the therapy as well got me writing even more. And as I learnt to understand what I was going through and understand what I was writing about, I was able to almost reclaim my story, take it away from being something that happened in a hospital and make it something that happened to me as a human being. And I was able to then find two really kind of significant things that being ill had taught me in answering this question. I found a form that I liked and was good at. I was able to put together this kind of poetry and to help with my memory and to process everything that are going on. And that's when I wrote Rebel Blood Cells. So this is a book that deals entirely with that leukemia diagnosis. It deals with the life in hospital, and it deals with the recovery and the hope, I think, which is the key thing that lies behind this, because without it, you're kind of lost. And then, how has that illness helped my writing or shaped my writing? Well, in terms of my second book, which is Skies Die Starless, this is a book again which is about processing memories. Well, like to start off with, you seem to be dealing with someone who is just a bit reckless and having a fun time. What you're actually dealing with is someone who is trying to understand who he is. He's trying to understand what turns out now to be, neurodivergency, and then trying to deal with grief. I lost a friend when I was 20, when he was 20, and I'm still dealing with that. And writing through his loss in poetry has really, really helped me. And I wouldn't be able to do this if I hadn't gone through the illness. And I guess the final thing that writing these pieces and being ill has helped me with is understanding that how to write the personal but make it universal. I read poems by Jamie Hale, Daniel Sluman, Hannah Hodgson, and although I don't have the same barriers that they're facing, although I don't face the same challenges that they're facing, I've learnt so much from reading them about converting it to become a universal acceptance. And finding like a home within disabled poetry has been great. People like Beth Handley is just a fantastic writer. And again, I can't necessarily have the same experiences that she has, but I can relate to them and I can empathise and I can say, this is an incredible poem, I need to try harder. And just being part of a community, albeit slightly from the outside, I still feel like, I found a home, which back when I was writing short stories, I didn't really have. I didn't have something to write about. I didn't have a niche. But kind of I do now. And although I'd rather have never had leukemia, I'm really pleased I've been able to take some small, tiny positives out. The opposite of spring. You tell me about the white petaled daffodils. You've planted some bulbs yourself in your front garden, but they've not bloomed yet. The frost-tipped grass frozen in place, crunching under my patent leather shoes. The snowflake blossom and the tall, leafless trees, all reflected in the black mirrored water. The fountain sprays constantly, sparkling whites and greens with deceptions of depth. You tell me about every tiny pond skater and bird call, anything at all, to avoid talking about the other side of the lake. The black car, the grey marble stones, the solid oak coffin and the hole, both too freshly carved for this to be ignored. I'm not very prolific as a writer. I would like to be more prolific, but I can only write something I care about. So as I said, I've tried writing novels, I've tried writing novellas, I've tried writing short stories, but unless I'm really passionate about something, I can't. I've tried writing nature poems, and I ended up writing a nature poem about a dandelion, which was actually dispensing COVID every time the wind blew. So I really struggle to do anything unless it matters to me. And I don't know where that's going to take me. I'm the kind of person that will spend time doing a project and then probably nearing conclusion, I get bored and I start doing something else. So, I've done all the artwork for my books. I love doing artwork. I've made videos for some of my poems. And then that wasn't enough, so I wrote music for some of my poems and then recorded them and made videos for them and got played on the radio with some of my poems, which was supposed to promote my book, but now I'm thinking maybe I go down that route. So I don't know what I'm doing at any given point in time. I do know that I'm pretty good at writing poems and I need to carry on doing that. And the main things that are driving me, and I think a lot of like-minded individuals, shall we say, is the current socio-political climate that we live in, and how can we address that and how do we live with that? Because there's no, it's a fad and it's going to go away. There's something quite serious going on in the world at the moment. And I think as someone who has a platform, someone who has a way with words, I feel responsible that I need to get that message across. I don't want to be like a spokesman for my generation. The men of my generation have spoken enough. But what I do feel I can do is to, speak truth, to show people what is happening and to provide a context to it in the same way that we have Blood Cancer Awareness Month, in the same way that we have Black History Month. We need a Fascism Awareness Month at the moment. And that's something that I would like to be able to contribute by sharing empathy, by sharing words, by sharing tactics with which to try and cope with. And, I'm performing at the inaugural Love Poetry, Hate Racism event in Swansea with one of my heroes, Patrick Jones, and with Rhoda Thomas. And hopefully we can get a real kind of movement going of the lost art of writing protest poems that aren't just, Maggie, 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 out, 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 but something that is more heartfelt, something that is more universal, and something that can really change the world. I believe in that power, that poetry can change the world, because you've got to, because otherwise, why else would you write it?